And we're live. I'm Eddie Stone. Nice for you to join me. It's Friday. I have to say I love Fridays, sort of the mischievous energy in the air. So hope it's a great experience wherever you are and you're headed into a wonderful weekend. I want to spend a few minutes today talking about types of people. And a number of inspirations for this, but one of them is that it's National Apple Month. I'm a big fan of apples. I even have an apple book here. It says Apples of Uncommon Character. Now today I'm going to talk about apples, but I'm not going to talk about apples per se. I'm going to talk people. We're going to use apples as a way to relate to them. And this is important because over the last several weeks we've been talking about both personal and professional success. And one of the things that I've learned during my career is that you want to make sure you're prepared, right? You want to be prepared for, sort of what's headed your way, right? Some people talk about being able to see around corners. And I feel like having a general understanding of personality types can make a big difference. And I think we all sort of have these ideas in our mind, right? For example, I bet everyone watching us, right, whether it's live or later, you all know someone that when they walk into a room, they liven it up, right? It's a richer room for them having entered it, and it's a little diminished, right, when they leave. And by the same token, I bet everybody watching knows someone that when they walk into the room, they kind of darken the room, and when they leave, maybe we're all better for it, right? They might not even be aware of it, but you certainly are. So you can probably get an idea of what I'm talking about. And so here's the way I think about this, and where this is relevant to personal and professional success is that you want to make sure you understand enough about people so that at the end of the day, the end of the month, the end of the year, you've spent your time as wisely as possible with the right people to the degree that you can, right? You're always going to find a situation where you spent time with someone and it turns out that wasn't the right person to spend time to. And in fact, that's one of those things every time I do my sort of 6-month assessment of how I've been spending my time, I've invariably spent time with sort of that wrong person. And so I believe it's important to try to identify, okay, from a general sense, right, who are the right people? Because I think about things in finite terms, right? There's a lot of things about life that have sort of infinite qualities, but when it's talking about time and days, when a day is over, that day is over, right? And it can't be recaptured. And most of us having sort of a normal life expectancy, we've got about 4,000, maybe 4,200 Fridays in our life, 4,200 Saturdays in our lives. So time is finite, at least in the present, it's finite for us. There are other aspects of life and the journey that we're on, but this is critical, right? So here's how I think about these things, and I'll be right up front. I'm not the person that came up with these ideas. This has been around a long time and talked about in really numerous books. So the first one is, and this is easy, and I've got some props here to help me out. The first one is what I call red apples. And red apples are great. They're people that when you talk to them, and most likely this is somebody you have a relationship with, they're somebody inside your peer group, they're really open, right? They're open to what you have to say. They're not really coming to it with any sort of built up barriers around them. The sort of jaded qualities of life are sort of absent in the dynamics between you and that person. And so a red apple, which I think really represents about 80% of the people that we speak to, they're open to hearing what you say, and they sort of take that information at face value. And in most cases, right, when you're talking about a health or nutrition product you've been using, or a new exercise program, or a movie you attended, whatever it happens to be, right, they sort of jump on it, right? They'll follow your lead, and they'll follow your lead pretty easily. And so it's amazing because you don't have to spend a whole lot of time. There's no real convincing. And by the same token, if they're not interested, they can be really straightforward and say, you know what, that's just not for me. My timing's bad, whatever it happens to be. And so you want to make sure that you recognize that really what you're looking for, if you're taking your time being judicious with it, is you're looking to have dialogues with red apples. Now you might be thinking, well, how do I know they're a red apple? I think you know through experience, right? We've talked about that Emerson says the skill to do comes from the doing. I think that's also in how we develop our perceptions of people, right? You at age 57, or 56, gosh, I've aged myself another year. At age 56, my perceptions and experiences with people have allowed me, or they allow me to sort of recognize these things earlier in a conversation. That wasn't true 30 years ago. So you earn these things over time, but knowing what you're looking for is a big difference. So the first one is red apples, and really and truly, that's who you want to be having dialogues with. The second group are what I call green apples. And if about 80% is really that red apple group of people, then in my experience, about 15% is the green apple. And there's nothing wrong with green apple folks, right? They're wonderful, but you've got to make sure that 80% of your time is not spent with this 15% of the population that for the most part can be defined by not really being able to make a decision. They really struggle, right? They're sort of fence sitters, if that makes sense to you. They're people that have trouble pulling the trigger, not necessarily because of fear. It could be some of that. It may be procrastination, but the bottom line is your job is not to invest 80% of your time trying to get the 15% to sort of make a move, make a decision, because in most cases, what we're talking about here are really very simple decisions, and it really requires no more than just say a yes or a no, because they're, at least at the outset, they're not life-changing. They could be, but at the outset, they don't really appear that way. So here's a rule of thumb and a professional lesson to share with you. Use tools to work with green apples. For example, someone reached out to me today and they were asking what I think they probably thought were some really serious, detailed questions about one of our products. And I just responded back and said, hey, all of that information is contained on our shop page, and sent them the link to that particular product, one of the gallery images, because what I recognized is they hadn't really tried to explore anything on their own, right? They just sort of wanted it to be spoon-fed to them. No problem. I sort of have an understanding of where they're coming from. But in this case, being conscious of my time, it's in demand on a daily basis, just like everybody else, right, in this hyper busy world that we live in. I'm conscious to use tools. So recently on one of our lives, I spoke about being familiar with the website, right? It's one of your greatest assets and tools. This is where that kind of thing comes into play, because you don't want to try to be an expert here. You're really a messenger, someone funneling information to someone, and you've got all these resources to help you do that, from the people you work with, the experiences, to our website. So green apples manage with tools so they don't wind up taking all of your time. Now, my next category, and this is really, if about 80% of the red apples and 15% of the green apples, then this makes up the other, say, 5% of this personality type apple population that we're talking about. But a word of caution, this can be the one that has the most impact on you in terms of taking up time or taking emotional energy. And so the first one I want to talk about are candy apples, right? If you can see that. This is a messy caramel candy apple with nuts, which is appropriate because the North Carolina State Fair is in full force here where we live. And so candy apples are a big part of it. And I have to admit, I have a weakness for candy apples. And so this one will go out home with me this evening and be a post-meal snack. I do love a good candy apple. But here's the thing about candy apples in terms of people. They're individuals that over-embrace everything that you're saying and would suggest to you that they are the latest and the greatest thing. They give off this appearance that they're the shiny object. They're going to change the dynamics of your business. They're going to hold a fitness class and tell 100 people about a wonderful product that you have. Or they're going to build a team of 1,000 people, and you're going to be able to retire and get in this vehicle and get to the beach earlier than you possibly anticipated. Here's the challenge with that. Most of the time, it's just hot air. I mean, I hate to say it and I hate to burst a bubble, but it's really, I've been doing this for 30 years, and these candy apples, I can think of almost no situation where there was a ton of bluster and overconfidence that I could feel and sort of smell from the conversation, that it didn't wind up being a massive waste of my time. But most importantly, it caused me to stop in my tracks from what I'm supposed to be doing, which is sharing the information that I'm excited about, advocating for the products I'm excited about, the cause that I'm excited about, or the business that I'm excited about, because I stopped and said, oh, my work is done. I found this candy apple. And now I've been sort of sucked into going to the sideline instead of continuing to play the game. It's continuing to participate with the activities of building the business. This is a big warning to watch out for people that have a big story that in the back of your mind know is very, very unlikely. I see these folks as a candy apple or a lottery ticket, whichever one of those you want to call it. And we all know that those chances, that lottery ticket paying off, I mean, they pay off somewhere for someone, but I don't know anybody that's won one, right? And so that's really the same thing though. So that's the next type, right? So we've got red apples, we've got green apples, and we've got candy apples. Now, I want to talk about fake apples. And I had a little problem finding a good fake apple because I wanted it to really look fake. And so I went by the local craft store, and the best thing I could find is this one, which is made of plastic, but the darn thing does not quite look as fake as I wished it were. So I don't know if you can tell, but this is definitely a fake apple. Here's the thing about a fake apple. They're a fake expert. And you've met these folks. They don't have a background to sort of justify this amount of confidence they have. You know, they read one or two sentences of an article on the New York Times, or they heard some story on CNN, and all of a sudden they're this expert. And so you begin to speak or talk, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, I got this completely figured out. And the truth is they've got nothing figured out because they've got a very narrow sense of the facts associated with this situation, right? They're an expert only in their own minds. And so they're really what I call fake in this regard. And again, here's my caution to you. One is the amount of time you could spend with them, but more than that, they can throw you off your game. You've got to know what you know. You've got a wonderful website that's been checked for facts up and down and sideways, vetted in every way it could by the medical community as well as experts in other areas that we work in. And so you can rely on the facts that are there. And over time, you know, you'll develop more confidence in this regard. So just like I'm warning you about getting off your game when you're dealing with those candy apples, you got to really have that same sort of guard or caution when you're dealing with these fake apples, because they're going to rob you of your time. And then the last one, which was also difficult for me to get, I want to talk about rotten apples. And so last evening I stopped in the local Whole Foods, and I found a guy in the produce section that said, hey, you happen to have an apple in the back that's rotten. And he was really super suspicious of me. Finally convinced him that I legitimately wanted a rotten apple as a prop, and this was the best he could do for me. But it's definitely rotten, right? I can probably cut the bad part off, but it's definitely the rotten apple for our explanation. And here's what I'll tell you about the rotten apples. They're probably the folks that, when I talked earlier about some people walk into a room and they light it up, and then other people can walk into a room and they darken it. That's really what I call the rotten apples. Because if the candy apples are people that they're just not connected to facts and figures, right? You know, they don't necessarily mean to, you know, be who they are, loud and boisterous, right? They're probably self-aware as they might be. Certainly the fake apples, I'm certain those individuals aren't quite as unaware as they really are, or aware that they're unaware, so to speak. I don't really believe either of those groups have sort of nefarious intentions, but rotten apples, I'm really cautious about rotten apples. And in fact, I work hard basically to not include those people in my lives any more than I have to, because I realize their energy, right? You've heard the thing about one bad apple can spoil the barrel. That's really true, because their energy is so dark, it sort of sucks the light out of the room, no matter how bright or shiny your light happens to be. They're the individuals that don't just say to you, they say, when you're talking to them, they don't just say no, they say, no, you dummy, right? It comes with a force from their unhappiness, maybe some kind of ugly aspect of what they're doing. And so I want to caution you about that, because they're not coming from some place of sincerity. And in fact, I would argue that they're being very insincere, or maybe they're just wanting to keep you down or they're unhappy with themselves or whatever it happens to be. And those individuals can really sort of suck the life out of you. And if you're not careful, particularly in the early stages of your business, really it can throw you off to the game to the point where you're just not certain of what you're doing. And here's the thing I would ask you to consider. Should their opinion matter to you? And this is a maturity that has to take place, particularly when you're taking on a new endeavor. I certainly know when I first began in this industry, I could have easily been sidetracked by green apples, spending too much time with them. I could have been faked out by the fake apples, right? Because I wasn't quite certain. The candy apples would have definitely thrown me back, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've won, right? And I just started. And then the rotten apples as well. But then I had to really step back and say, you know what? Should their opinion matter, right? They're telling me this superfood thing that I believe deeply in is a fad, right? The super green juice that I begin every single day with. Oh, that doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter all this dialogue about food, right? And I look at them and they're unhealthy. They really can't take the steps. You know, they're not this picture of health, but yet they're trying to tell me they have everything figured out. Or on the financial side, right? Someone says, hey, that dream of yours, that's BS. You know, that's not going to work for you. You're not special. There's only a few people that happens for, and yet you look at where they're coming from, and they're not someone you should be paying attention to in terms of financial advice or financial questions, right? And so, I mean, and that isn't maybe always true. Sometimes there are people coming from success, but just remember, no one's occupying your space, filling your shoes, or carrying your responsibilities or burdens but yourself. And so if you've got something that you believe is an answer to health challenges that you've struggled with, or getting to a retirement or a work environment that you're happy with, be clear about who you're hearing from and learn to say, hey, I hear you. You and I are just going to have to agree to disagree, because I'm set and I'm committed to where I'm going. This is the direction I've chosen. What I've often found is that when I say to someone, hey, I acknowledge your opinion, I don't agree with you, but just to be clear, your opinion doesn't change anything about my direction, the energy I'm putting into what I'm doing, the changes I'm making in my life. I am gonna lose this 20 pounds. I'm not gaining this 20 pounds back, or whatever it happens to be. That's where the steadiness of your resolve really has to come into play. So one of the things that we've talked about several times here is that when you're helping someone get started, either with the products or the business, whatever that happens to be, that's why you say, hey, listen, if this thing is successful 3 years from now, what does that look like for you, right? So they can begin to develop those images and then rely on those images when that time comes, when they've met that rotten apple, that fake apple, or even that candy apple, right? So these are all dynamics that play a role in the success that people enjoy. The other side of this is I make sure I say to someone when I'm first starting with, what if someone says to you, not just no, but no, you dummy? What do you do when you encounter negative voices when you're starting a project? And it's interesting because a lot of people don't really think of a beginning having to have that question. But what I've found in my experience is that when someone has had to think about that already, then they're prepared in a way for when that day comes, and they'll hearken back to that, and it provides them strength. So that's our discussion today about apples. And I hope you appreciate the little play on words there from Good Will Hunting, the Matt Damon story when he got the phone number and he said, how about them apples, right? So apples can be extremely instructive in this regard, and feel free to use this, right? Because the apple analogy works for everyone. So red apples, right? That's what we're looking for. We guard our time, we guard our emotions so we can find those individuals. Green apples, right? Use your tools. Be careful not to get distracted with the candy apples. Caution with the fake apples, right? And avoid those rotten apples at all cost, right? That's my advice to you today. So as you go out into the evening, I hope you make this a wonderful weekend. Find a way to be both productive personally and professionally. This month is really shaping up nicely from a business standpoint. I'll tell you a little secret. We added more customers today than we ever have in any single day in the history of the company. So congratulations to you for the work you're doing. It's pretty exciting, and looking forward to spending more time with you on these lives here next week. Bye for now. Make it a great weekend.